And we welcome you to In the Circle live postgame show. Game 3 of the National Championship Series goes to Oklahoma, 5-1 the final. I'm Eric Lopez, where we have a couple of guests joining us throughout this postgame show as the Sooners wrapping up a 5-1 win over Florida State. G. Juarez named the most outstanding player of the Women's College World Series, pitches another gem and gets the victory. It is national title number 5 for Patty Gasso. Here to describe it and help us kind of recap it, our new friend, Jenna Becerra, Pac-12 Network analyst, has her own podcast as well. We just finished with Game 3. Give me your initial thoughts here after what we just watched.
I mean, honestly, I'm still recovering a little bit. Like it just happened, but it's 2 years since we actually had an NCAA softball national champion. So just the fact that we even made it here after everything that happened with COVID-19 last year, even baking into this year as well, we actually made it to this point. So part of me is just almost like heart eyes for softball right now. Like that's kind of how I feel. But then when you look at the championship game, specifically what we just watched, Oklahoma just started the season this way and they ended it this way. And it seems very fitting that this is how they get their 5th national championship.
It really is, and scored 5 runs to win their 5th national title as well. And Jocelyn Alo got it started early with the solo homer in that first inning, set the tone. And it was interesting because yesterday they talked about, hey, we kind of tend to press when we don't get off to good starts in the first 3 innings, which kind of surprised me that players would admit that, especially at Oklahoma. You would think, like, really, you're going to be phased if you don't get off to a good start? But they kind of admitted that they were pressing early in some of these games. But that was not the case today.
It definitely wasn't. But I think, we saw Patty Gasso and they showed it on TV, her kind of taking the team into the corner to have that conversation with them privately. And then also just keep getting them in the shade as well, because, hey, it was like 100 plus degrees while they were there. But I think it was one of those things where actually throughout this entire Women's College World Series, especially after they lost Game 1, the amount of energy that they have, it was like they were screaming after every single hit, every single play, just like every action shot is them just yelling. But today felt like they really channeled that energy even more. Like we talked earlier in the pregame show about not letting the moment get bigger than you. And I feel like they did a great job of approaching that well. Like they actually came in today, didn't overdo it, and just played. Like you can even see, I think Donahue is a great example of that. Like she's the one I'm kind of thinking of where she's just going nuts at like every second of the game. But she made some great plays and had some great things happen this game and was just almost like relaxed and felt, I don't know, it looked like they were feeling good and feeling smooth. And I think that's what you want. Ideally, you want to peak at the right time. They had some last minute struggles here at the very beginning of the Women's College World Series, but they came back and it was just up and to the right all the way to the end.
Jada Coleman had a big game, 2 for 3 RBIs, including a couple there that broke the game open in the middle of the ball game there in that bottom of the 3rd when Oklahoma scored 3 runs to really put the game out of reach. I want to ask you, though, because we talked about what each team would do from a pitching standpoint. Florida State started Danielle Watson, which I kind of predicted. I wasn't surprised by that. She didn't pitch in Game 2, so that didn't surprise me. She had some success in Game 1. But the thing that shocked me, I'll be honest with you, Jen, it shocked me. I was not anticipating this. And I'll be curious what Lonnie Alameda has to say in the postgame. Lonnie goes to Emma Wilson, a youngster who had appeared in like 18 games this year and has only thrown 20 innings. She did bring her in Game 2, but she brings her in a big spot and to face Alo and company, and it kind of backfired. She went 2 2/3 of an inning, 2 walks, including a wild pitch that allowed a run to score, 2 runs and a hit. She picked Wilson before going to Sandercock. That surprised me. What was your reaction when you saw that?
Also shocked, because like we talked about before the game, this is it. Like I understand that some players are tired, right? Everyone's tired at that point, especially given what Florida State had to go through to get there, playing up into the wee hours of the morning earlier in the World Series, etc. Oklahoma had to play late too. But, there's a difference between being tired. If someone has an actual injury or something like that, that's one thing. But this is it. You got to empty the tank at this point. So I don't know if that went into her decision making for that in that moment, but I was shocked as well. I think, like I said, I wanted to see best on best. I think this is the time, if ever, to do that. And it took us a while into the game to even get to that point. So yeah, also was very shocked by that.
Because it was a 2-1 game at that point. I thought that was the time. If you're going to go, I wasn't surprised she pulled Watson when she did. Right. I really expected Sandercock to get the ball there. She's your All-American. She's your horse. I mean, yes, it takes you have a staff by committee. You've only had 13 complete games, and I get that. But Sandercock, anybody that's seen Florida State, especially in this postseason, she's your best. And I just was stunned that she threw a youngster like Wilson in that spot. If this was game one, I might even, okay. But I just think this was a case here where you're maybe trying to be cute. And I know coaches like to do this, Jenna. Hey, let's bring her in because they don't have a book on her. We haven't seen her, right? Like maybe we could spring some surprises here. But the only surprise was that she kind of gave up the run on a wild pitch because she's young and it did not work. And whereas Oklahoma went old school, Patty Gasso said, you know what? I'm going with my horse. I'm going with my ace. For all this talk about the staffs, she went with the hot hand and Juarez, and it paid off.
Well, that's the thing. It's like you can take that by committee approach that you've taken all year long, but sometimes we can go a little overboard with it as well and start to overthink, oh, I should put this person in at this time and bring this other person at this other time, or maybe I'll save them. Sometimes we can overdo it. And I was actually surprised that Juarez didn't get a little bit more pitching time earlier in the Women's College World Series. But when they needed her, when it all came down to it in this championship series, that's who they went to. And she executed, like she came through. And so you have to wonder why not do that on the other side of things with Florida State. It's all on the line. This is it. You got nothing to lose but the game. So you may as well go all out for it.
The Juarez story is fascinating. She's had her struggles. You mentioned on the broadcast, she had a bicep injury last year. Some people wondered if she can bounce back and come back to pitch at the high level. She struggled at times during this season. Heck, even in the postseason, she did not pitch one pitch in the Super Regional against Washington. They went with Nicole May and Shannon Sale. But I was at Patty Gasso's presser on last week. I think it's last week. It's been a long week in Oklahoma City. Before the World Series started, and she mentioned that Juarez had the best week of her Sooner career practice, that she was handling the pitchers and she had that eye. And Patty has talked about how she's challenged her pitchers internally. Who wants the ball? It's nothing's given to you. She wants that internal competition. And I think G rose from that. And look, it didn't work out. They started Sale in the first game against JMU. I don't think Sale pitched badly at all. Made the mistake on the home runs, the 2 homers in that game that lost that first game. But I think she was ready to use G, and she used her on Saturday against Georgia, was dominant in that victory as a starter, came in relief when it mattered the most against UCLA, shut down the Bruins, the defending champs. She threw her on Monday, in the if necessary game against JMU after Sale and Nicole May got them there with the offense to beat Odyssey Alexander and company. And here it is, game 2 and game 3 with a season on the line. She goes to her again. I think she saved her. Sometimes, a fresh arm here late is beneficial. And I think G, knowing this is her last run, right, it clicked. It's like a switch for a young senior, right? You've been through it. When you know this is the end, you don't want to leave anything out on the field, right?
That's absolutely right. And there she is, most outstanding player of the Women's College World Series at the end of it all, after all of that. But I think you bring up a good point too, Eric, which is there's a lot that we don't see. We, meaning everyone outside of the actual team. There's a lot going on at practice and warm-ups and things like that inform the decisions that these coaches are making. So just because we know about G's past successes, at both ASU and since transferring to OU, and how she's been to the World Series before and all of those things, we're not the ones there with her every single day, because you have to make the decisions about what's happening right now. What have you done for me lately as well? And it turns out, okay, yeah, if this was her best week of practice, then you're going with her all the way. But if it was the opposite situation and it was one of her worst weeks of practice, then yeah, I mean, you don't do it just for the sake. I don't think we should make decisions for the sake of decisions, right? Like we need to make them based on what's happening in the moment and what's best for the team. And it turned out that it worked out well for Oklahoma.
And Patty Gasso is one of the most honest coaches out there when it comes to this stuff. Like, I've been blown away by that. I had her on in the fall. I think it was around November time. I think it was on the podcast. This is before the season starts in February, and she was fantastic. She told me we just had the best fall the offense. Just had the best fall that I've ever seen. Think about that. Best offense of fall that we've ever had here. With some of the offenses she's had, she said this was the best offense, and she felt this would be the best offense she ever had. I don't know if she predicted all these records that would break, and I remember when she told me that, sometimes you know this, doing interviews. Sometimes you're like, all right, is that just kind of like you're just pumping your team up and all? She was right. Like, she called it. She was telling the truth. And I think it was the same thing with Juarez last week in the press conference. She was like, you know what? This is the healthiest, the best she's looked. She's got, she's got that eye, and boy, did she ever. I thought this was the best that she's ever pitched in her career, honestly, since she was at Arizona State. When I saw her in 18 in the Women's College World Series, leading Arizona State to the Women's College World Series. She was good in 19 with Oklahoma, but this version that we saw in the last week was better than that version. What a way for her to finish her career.
Oh, unbelievable. And just the spin on her pitches, the movement and the location, because that's the thing. We talked about this earlier. Sometimes, like, even if a ball curves or if it drops or if it does whatever you're trying to get it to do, if it's still over the wide of the plate, with the way hitting is these days, it's not enough. You have to be able to hit those corners, change planes, change speeds, have a good mix. And she had all of those things. She was able to execute all of those things. And I think, there's a reason they call her Natty Patty. Like, she knows what she's looking for to put people in the positions to be successful.
That's 5 national championships for Patty Natty. Pretty amazing run. She won her first in 2000, didn't win another one until 2013, but now they are the standard in college softball. I think everybody agrees with that. From afar, what impresses you about her and what she's done with this program as someone who has played in the sport, as someone who's played in one of the toughest conferences in the sport in a Pac-12, to see this is the thing. They have really dominated this sport here that a lot of people didn't think would be possible. It used to be a Pac-12 sport and SEC and all the back and forth about that. But here's Oklahoma, the most dominant program right now in college softball and one of the most dominant programs in all of college athletics, period.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And honestly, it's an amazing thing for our sport because, to your point, yes, the Pac-12 was far and away, even to this day, I think I can't remember the exact numbers, but something like 24 out of now, I want to say 39 or somewhere in there, championships are Pac-12. So that's what we were used to. The SEC comes in, just explodes viewership, especially with the rights with ESPN. And then you have like the ACC as well. And I think Florida State's a great example of that conference elevating. The Big Ten's had their moments too. But with Oklahoma, for a long time in like the last 10 years or so, it's really been the Pac-12, the SEC, and Oklahoma. Like that's really what it's been. I think from having my conversations on the Believe in Softball podcast, I was able to interview Kaylani Ricketts as well as Shay Knighton, who are obviously two legends in Oklahoma history. Shay Knighton specifically for the Women's College World Series as well. And then Kaylani just overall Player of the Year, national champion herself. So they've literally been in these young women's shoes. The big thing that they talked about with Patty Gasso is that she really knows how to adjust over time as well. So you talk about how the last national championship was in 2013. She's able to, as the lives of these young student athletes change, like life now as a student athlete, a little different than when I was a student athlete. You have to make adjustments. We talk about the game being a game of adjustments for players, at-bat to at-bat, pitch to pitch, all those things. Coaches also have to make adjustments. And the coaches that you see being more and more successful, like Patty Gasso, are ones that look at their student athletes as a whole person. That's what kept coming up as a theme, too, from these players is she cares about me as a person. She checks in with me off the field as well. It's not all about softball. I think you have to have balance. And that's how you get buy-in. I think that's the huge thing. Everybody buys into Patty Gasso. Like, no doubt, there's nobody questioning why she's there, why she cares about everybody, what the game plan is, because they know that she's put her heart and soul in there and she's gotten that buy-in from making those relationships with her team. I think that's been the difference maker.
very genuine, and what a run. 5 national titles. Think about the Gasso tree with all the coaches across the country. I mean, you're covering one right now. Melissa Lombardi at Oregon, Trip McKay at Kennesaw, Samantha Ricketts over at Mississippi State. I mean, there's a ton. We could go forever. And what's amazing is this is the time where the sport is the most parity. Like when the Pac-12 had their run, it was basically Pac-12, invitational. Let's be real. This isn't a time where you've got teams like James Madison that can make a run, teams in the SEC. You mentioned the ACC, even the Big 12. She makes the Big 12 look easy, but Texas with Mike White, they've been kind of on the rise. Oklahoma State, Kenny Gajewski's now gotten to a couple Women's College World Series. The depth of this sport is deeper than it's ever been, but yet here's Oklahoma once again, and they'll be a favorite. They're always going to be a contender as long as Coach Gasso wants to coach.
They will, and their success does breed more success outside. And we talked about growth. So, yes, outside the Pac-12, outside of the SEC. When you look at the ACC, I mean, give credit to Florida State. Like, they were just there. They were the champions in 2018. All of a sudden, they're back in that champ series now, just a couple of seasons, World Series later, we'll say, since 2020 was such a gap. But, I mean, you look at Duke and Clemson specifically within that conference. I mean, I think the success that Florida State has in 2018 contributes to the interest of young athletes into the ACC. So then you look at these two programs being able to, in their first full season, Clemson clinches the regular season title for the ACC. It's only been team 4 this past season for Duke, and they're able to win the tournament, and they're a top 16 seed. Like these things, everything is a stepping stone. Everything's a building block. And then when you start to see consistent success like we've seen from Oklahoma, that opens the doors for more programs as well.
That's a great point, because so much focus was this year about Florida State. Well, they didn't win the ACC regular season. They didn't win the tournament. Well, the reason is because the ACC is better. Clemson with John Rittman, who is a brilliant coach. Like what he's done at Clemson is insane. And Duke with Marissa Young, that you mentioned, they got a national seed. I thought, there was so much chatter about the committee and the seeding and all that. And I said before that this was going to be the hardest year to seed the tournament because of such a unique year with the imbalance of scheduling and things like that. But I thought one of the conferences that had a real gripe was the ACC, because they had a regular season champion and an ACC tournament champion that didn't even get to host.
Correct.
And I think it speaks volumes. Virginia Tech got to the Supers, pushed UCLA to a Game 3 with Keely Richard, who's expected to be back. They're going to be a contender next year. Notre Dame was within a win of making the Supers. I think it's a great point. The ACC is on the rise, and they're investing money in the sport, right?
Yes.
That's huge. Clemson has beautiful facilities. Florida State's renovated their stadium. I think we're seeing more of that. The SEC has done a great job of renovating their stadiums. Hildebrand at Arizona has done that. Oregon has a beautiful facility. I think there's other schools I won't name that need to step up when it comes to that stuff. But that's also great for the sport because it helps the student athlete in their experience.
That's exactly right. Actually, on the most recent interview I had with Chelsea Spencer, part 1 was last week, part 2 will be tomorrow, but she talks about how she said thank you to the SEC because of the investment that they've put, especially into their facilities and different types of investments too. The facilities is one thing that's amazing. It's fantastic. But then even into the sort of promotional aspect as well. I mean, the top engagement that you see on social media with college softball programs, a lot of them are in the SEC. Clemson was actually really high on that list as well from the ACC, having been a brand new program. But the way that they have established those things and the fan bases that they have, they're pushing other conferences. Like the Pac-12 is no longer able, they are the conference of champions. I still very much believe that is true. It's in the numbers, but you can't just rest on that anymore. Like we have to take this to the next level in terms of investment to keep this going because everybody else is going to. Like softball's on the rise and we got to be on the rise with it.
That's a great point. By the way, you're a pro at this. I love how you've plugged in your podcast twice during the interview. Do it again. No, do it again here. I want you to do it again for those that may not be aware. So I want people to know where they can subscribe to your podcast. Tell them about your podcast, where they can subscribe.
I appreciate that. Yes, it is Believe in Softball with the Believe Podcast Network. So that is spelled BLEAV. It's on anywhere that you get your podcasts. Listen anywhere, Apple, Spotify, you name it, as well as Believe.com. And then also on YouTube, which is a new aspect that we added this season too. So find it anywhere. And at Believe in Softball on social media as well, Instagram and Twitter.
And I'm not going to give away a lot about your interview with Chelsea Spencer, but I know where the interview is going because I've talked to Chelsea about it. And that's that stadium, because Cal was a power at one point with Coach Ninemeyer. And they've had some, when they had obviously like Valerie Arioto and company, they were number one in the country in 2012. But they've had some struggles recently, and part of it is the facilities. And finally, they're addressing that to get a on-campus new stadium that's going to help them, and that's going to help Coach Spencer. I know she's gotten help from Ron Rivera and his family, who's the football coach for Washington. So that's huge for her because that's a tough job. It's tough to compete now. Mike Kendra has been outspoken about it. He has seen it. He complimented Arkansas in their facilities, and I think it's good for the game. Patty Gasso's talking. Oklahoma's trying to get a new stadium. They're trying to raise money for that as well. And you mentioned it. The sport's growing. It's no longer – I think people, administrators, used to take this for granted. Like, it's softball. We just throw it out there. But this is a spectator sport. Attendance keeps going up. TV viewership goes up. It's a great product. This is an event where people now they go. It's no different than going to a NBA basketball game or baseball. This is part of sports entertainment now. Hey, I want to go to a softball game and catch it. I've been to – I don't know how many stadiums you've been to across the SEC. I know, but like I went to the Roadhouse at Alabama the first 7 years ago, and I'm like, is this a softball stadium or a baseball stadium? Like it was insane. But it shows you what a great venues these places have. Florida just renovated over here in Florida. So I think it's a great point. Facilities for the student athletes, the demand is there. Patrick Murphy said it during one of the TV interviews. Invest in the sport. It's up to the administrators now. It's up to them. They have no more excuses. One
of the best in-game coach interviews, by the way, is Patrick Murphy, in my opinion, because he always knows how to either talk up softball, talk up the Alabama program. Like he's always ready for that. Like there's always a bigger picture that's on his mind versus just the plays that they're talking about that are happening. I just think he's fantastic at it. I played at Alabama in super regionals my junior year, and it was awesome. Right. It was fantastic. Like the fan base that shows up there is unbelievable. And the investment that they have, not only, paying for the seats to be there, but also just that emotional investment and the energy that is within the stadium. And then you see that at the Women's College World Series on steroids, even more so because of all the different fan bases coming together. And I think in the past, sometimes softball's been categorized as this it's not a revenue sport. Oh, people don't watch it enough, whatever. Well, we're way past that at this point. The ratings are through the roof. We've been seeing, I think game one was 1.8 plus million viewers that tuned in.
And they just released game two. Over 2 million viewers watched game two. It peaked at towards the second half of the game at 2.6 million. That's the fourth softball game ever to top 2 million viewers. The most watched college softball game ever was 2007, Tennessee and Arizona, 2.33 million. I've spoken that in depth. We had Christy Fox the previous couple nights. She's talked about that. 2007, Monica Abbott, Taryn Moad and company. Great game there. 2015, Florida, Michigan, game 3, 2.27. And then Michigan, UCLA, 2005, 2.24. This game 2 did over 2 million. It's the first non-game 3 to draw over 2 million viewers. They probably would have broken the record if today's game would have been at prime time. It wasn't. It is what it is. I'm not going to dwell on that because I think there's been too much talk about that. It's just one of those unique circumstances. But you're right, and Murph's great. If you haven't had him on your podcast, I recommend him. He gets it because his background was media relations when he used to work with Yvette Girard. He's a genius when it comes to that. Rachel Lawson has given him credit for, hey, this is how you're supposed to market the sport and things like that. And I think he's been one of the best at that. We have a question, Jenna. They got a question for us, so you might as well address it. Sky Chicken 9 has a question for us. When does the NCAA decide on rule changes, and what do you expect to change for 2022, like transparent seating for the tournament and instant replay, et cetera, for the Women's College World Series? I don't know. Well, that's usually in the off season, right? Like they usually meet up in the summer, fall time. They have a committee. They go over some stuff. So that's the answer there. What would you like them to address? I'm gonna try to tweak the question there a little bit. What would you like to see them address and add for 2022 or beyond?
I think the two biggest things that you'll see, we've seen it for a while, but especially in the Women's College World Series on social media, people are talking about it. The two biggest things that we need one instant replay. Gotta have it. I mean, you can see clearly, especially when we're at home and you see calls. It's really hard to make calls live too, with how fast this game is. Like, to give umpires credit, in their defense, it's not easy to be able to see everything in that fast. So instant replay is important. I mean, we got that. We have it in other sports. We got to do it. And then the other thing is I know that there's a lot of confusion on the obstruction rule. A lot of people hate the obstruction rule. I think the bigger issue, rather than the rule itself, is the inconsistency in which it's called. I think that's what causes the lack of clarity, the confusion, people not understanding and getting frustrated with it. So I think those two are like the biggest ones that I think, at least from a fan base perspective, we gotta figure out. I also think in general we need a little bit more investment with umpires. Like, even the strike zones were pretty inconsistent throughout the entire postseason, things like that. But, I want to take a step back and not just like blame it all on the umpires and be like, okay, well, how are we investing in them and getting the proper training, getting the reps? They also didn't have a season that they were calling last year either. So I think it's worth taking a closer look at that as well.
You and Mike Condrea are thinking alike. Mike Condrea said the same thing about the umpiring. He thinks the umpiring pool needs to grow. It was interesting because I asked him the question. It was before the Fayetteville Super Regional with media availability. And this is, by the way, shout out to all the SIDs this year that made Zooms available. I think it's been huge for the sport. I hope we keep some of it. I mean, I know everybody's looking forward to being back in person, and I get it. But I do think Zoom has helped because we've had access to coaches like never before, and they've been more outspoken, and I think it creates conversation, which I think is always a positive. And one of the examples here is before the Super Regionals in Fayetteville, Mike Condrea was available. And I asked him about instant replay because I'm with you. I think that's the number one topic. I think it's unacceptable that softball is the only college sport right now that does not have instant replay. Baseball has it. Volleyball has it. Soccer has it. Football, basketball. It makes no sense. The excuse of, we had 42 cameras at the World Series. Mm-hmm. We have plenty of cameras. The entire postseason now is carried by ESPN. So the excuse of, the games are not carried everywhere. No, they are. They have cameras now everywhere, even regular season games. Like I call UCF games for the American on ESPN Plus. This was their first year. Multiple camera angles. There's no reason why there's no instant replay. It's unacceptable, and you're right because it sets up the umpire. Look, the umpire's going to miss calls. It just is. But the problem is because there's no replay, it gets heightened, and it just turns a negative deal. So I'm 100%. But I want to go back to the Condrea point. Because you're the second person that brought this up. He was the first I heard about this. He feels that the umpiring pool hasn't grown, and they need to invest in that because it's the same umpires over and over again. And quite frankly, some of them get a little older. Some of them you're kind of shaking your head like, really? I got to see this person again? There could be some history involved with coaches and umpires. That was something that he mentioned, and you just brought it up as well. I've not heard that prior to you and him bring it up. So you and the GOAT of softball are in the same page as far as the umpiring poll is concerned.
Well, I will always take that. If I'm on the same page with the GOAT, then hey, I'm winning. That made my day right there. But it's true, and the thing is because it's sort of this like nasty cycle too. It's like if we don't have instant replay, for example, umpires don't have the opportunity to take a look and see what we see as fans, as media, etc. in the replays, the slow motion, all of those things. If they don't have the opportunity to see that, make the correct call, which oftentimes they would be able to do if they have that resource, then they're getting ripped apart on social media. People are so upset. There's boos in the stadium, all of those things. But that also doesn't make more people want to become umpires because of that. And it's like, if we give them more resources like that, it will create a better product. There'll be better performance. And then maybe that cycle will kind of stop. Like people will be like, you know what? Yeah, I do want to get into umpiring. But it's hard when you don't have all the resources and people are on you about it at the same time.
Agreed. And I think we need to get rid of obstruction. I think the thought process was well intended. It's for safety and all that. I get that. But what has happened now is every time there's a play, especially at home plate, and Victor, or my co-host, made a great point the other night. And because this happened in game one, instead of focusing on, wow, what a great play at home plate, we're focusing on, wait, is it obstruction or not? And we're asking these catchers, Jenna, to be robots. Oh, well, she moved before she had the ball or this or that. We're nitpicking every little move that the catcher does. And I just think that's not what the rule was intended for. But and these umpires have a different interpretation of the rules. Some will call it a certain way. Some won't. I think it takes away from the game. I understand the intent, but I'm tired of every time there's a play at home plate. Or, to me, the worst one was Friday night, the Oklahoma State JMU game on the rundown that we talked about, where there's very little contact, if at all, and they called obstruction because the runner basically ran into the defender. I think we need to get rid of that. I think it would make the life easier for the umpires. I think it would create less drama. I don't believe in softball. You could correct me if I'm wrong. You played the game. I don't believe runners and catchers are going out of their way to run into each other for collisions. I think this has been overblown. Am I wrong on that? I don't think people are going out of the way. You might see it once in a while, but I think this rule is just, you need to get rid of it.
I mean, at this level, no. And if that's what you're doing, I just don't see these top level coaches recruiting players that would do something like that on purpose, first of all. But I think it's all about the lack of clarity. It's too open for interpretation, which is why we see different interpretations of it. I do think that there should be something in place around safety in general, but so far this rule doesn't seem to be working consistently across the board. And that's what you need. Like, rules should be, and that's the point of rules, is they should be enforced consistently, and that should be the same environment or experience in every game that you have. So yes, it's tough. I think, on the flip side, like, part of me is like, if I were playing, maybe I would just go straight into home plate every time because I might get the obstruction call, right? And that's the opposite of the intent, to your point, of what the rule is in the first place. If I try to go around them and try to just sneak my hand in to tag, then maybe it's not called and maybe I'm out, but why not just go straight in? So you have to consider all of the implications that come with it. The other thing, though, I have to mention, because we're talking about NCAA changes, the Women's College World Series format got to change in terms of...
What would you do?
We got to have more days. I mean, Mendoza mentioned it on the broadcast as well, like that there's twice as many days for the same amount of teams in baseball. Now, I don't know, pitchers' arms are a little bit different. They also have larger staffs, things like that you consider with baseball. But I just think the fact that they started a game right before midnight is just not acceptable. Like, we can't be doing that. We have to have more days baked in to allow for that breathing room so that doesn't happen.
Right. There's no flexibility. They got caught. They have no flexibility. And I think part of the problem, and I've talked about this, the format schedule is outdated. It used to work when games were an hour and a half.
Sure.
That's not the case anymore in college softball. That Division I, at least, it's not.
They're not even 2 hours anymore. Because that's another thing. Like, TV wise, they're slotting 2 hours for every game, and we're really not there anymore. Like, it really needs to be like 2.5 hours.
Agreed.
That's the TV side. We're talking about NCAA formatting side.
Right.
Slightly different.
Well, the format's outdated because of that. Because you can't. You're not going to be able to fit the games. Now, there's a couple ways to doing this that could have prevented this. I agree about expanding. I'm not a fan of expanding it to the baseball schedule because it's hard for somebody to commit staying there. Like, Victor is not with me because he has to go back to work, after a week. 2 weeks, I think, is a little too long. However, I do think a couple days is not I think would work. And I think you could fit days in, especially in between the semifinal and the championship. You could do, and I've had Jessica Mendoza on the show. She brought up a great idea. Why not have a home run derby? College baseball has it for the World Series on their night off. Why not have it in softball? You could do a media day on your day off. Or if you need those days to have games be played, you play them. So you build in a day or two, if necessary games, you play them. Clearly, there was a big numbers for Monday nights if necessary games. So I agree. I think you fit in a couple days. I wouldn't go an extra week or two. I think that kind of is maybe an overkill to some extent, unless you're willing to move the sport further back. And then that way you might have more space from a TV standpoint. Because one of the issues is if you draw this out, like we saw today, you're going to run into some TV conflicts, and nobody wants that either from that standpoint either. So I think that's the middle ground. The other option would be, because Division II and Division III has done this, which in particular Division III I just covered in Salem. They had weather issues. They have a second field ready as an emergency to get games in, so you don't have to play at 2 a.m. So I think there's a couple ways to go at it. I don't know, and I know that the negative side in Division I is the second field in Oklahoma City is not as big. You lose the gate of 12,000, so I get it. But I'm just talking emergency. Like, to avoid playing at 2 a.m, you could have had another game. Like Florida State, if you had a second field ready, you could have had Florida State, Oklahoma State play in another field, start like a half hour after the UCLA Oklahoma game. Because we all knew once that Oklahoma UCLA game was assigned for 9:17 Eastern, 8:17. You knew that was not going to be a 1.5 hour game with those two teams. It was not going to happen. So what do you think about those ideas?
No, I think it makes sense. I mean, the main thing is you have to bake in more days. Like we're asking these games to sort of play out perfectly, and they're not going to with the current format that exists. I mean, especially we're talking about these are the best teams in the country that have made it this far. It's not going to be a straightforward game. There's going to be a lot of fighting back and forth, like and extra innings and things like that. Like we can't expect it to go as planned. So we need to adjust the plan because the current plan is not what's working. It's
outdated.
Yeah, it's outdated. But I think that's actually the bigger issue with people bringing up the fact that this wasn't on primetime. Of course, it was a disappointment. However, I think that it was a last minute change for ESPN. You have NBA going on at the same time, which is a huge investment for ESPN. But really the bigger issue is the Women's College World Series NCAA formatting. If we would have formatted this better, we could have planned ahead and not have that conflict. That's what the key is.
Correct, because this came out of nowhere. We had to push it an extra day. That wasn't planned. You can't just ask TV executives. And trust me, I know the people at ESPN who's involved in softball. Trust me, every option was looked at. It's this is not a gender thing. This is not like, they're keeping it down. And I brought up the example. This also happened to college baseball in 2016, where they got rain issues and they had to push game 3 to a 3:00 Thursday. The difference was they were pushed to ESPNU, not ESPN, like softball. So I agree with you. I think that's something that gets lost. You're right. If you had a better format and as a result, a better plan, you would have avoided all this. But there was no plan. I think everybody was caught off guard. Like, what do we do now?
Yes.
That's what happened.
That's where the gender issue is why softball is having to squish everything into this amount of time versus more with the NCAA format. But yes, TV has to really just adjust for what they're given. So they are two different things that we have to keep in mind.
I hope they tweak it. I'll be curious to see now, because one of the things, and you know this, because I've had Kelly Inouye Perez, she's been talking about instant replay since 2018.
Oh, that's the thing is a lot of these issues are not new. They're just getting a little bit more visibility now. First of all, I think people were chomping at the bit after not having softball last year. So it's like even more people are, magnifying glass onto the sport. Sure. And then on top of that, it's like, I think it's a buildup. There have been a lot of things that built up during COVID that then kind of the bubble burst in a lot of ways. I think this might be another example of that on this scale for college sports is, we've been asking for all these things for a really long time. It's time. Like time's up. We got to go. Enough's enough.
Well, especially if the TV numbers this is going to be the most watched postseason perhaps in the history of the sport. So, and I think the next step from a TV, I'm not going to let TV completely off the hook.
Right.
Because I will say this. I do think the Women's College World Series, especially the championship series, probably should be on ABC now moving forward.
I would love that.
Right? Like they just and I think they experimented with the super regional game, Washington, Oklahoma. They saw that it did very well. I heard rumors that last year they were going to have some games in the Women's College World Series. Obviously, we never had that season.
Right.
I do think it's coming. We saw gymnastics was on ABC this year. There's, the WNBA finals. They put some games on ABC. I think we're headed there. And I think the Women's College World Series Champ Series is going to be in ABC, which is another monumental moment. I think that's when the numbers are really going to explode. Oh,
absolutely. Because, this is something Heather Tarr said. People, even if they don't know they like softball yet, once they see it, they realize like, I get this. Yeah, I actually really like this. Like it doesn't take a whole lot to gain but fans. It really doesn't. And visibility creates opportunity. That's really what it is at the end of the day. So yes, if we show it more, but think about how we're showing it, like what channels, things like that, if we're strategic in that way, yes. Like I think this sport is already this season, a ton of growth just in 2021 so far. And we have more coming with the Olympics. There's so much more left.
I mean, that's the other thing, too. Now you got the boom of the Olympics. I think there's going to be a lot of interest on the softball side there. So many storylines. And then that's going to set up the 2022 year where we're probably going to be closer to normal. And now it's like, oh, wow, we can do all this stuff. And there's a lot of eyeballs watching softball that are not, like Jimmy Traina, who covers his media sports podcast, is into softball. He said it now. He said that's his top 4 favorite sport. He's mesmerized by pitchers. I can relate to that. I was somebody 14 years ago that wanted to be an NBA play-by-play guy. And then one day we had a student broadcaster that moved on. They needed somebody to fill in to do softball. I said, I'll do it because I got to work the NBA games at night. So at that time, softball was early. So I'm like, hey, and I got hooked. So it happens. You're right. All it takes, people get hooked to the sport in that regard. We got questions for you. I've ignored a question. People like you. They don't like me. Rob, with a question for you. Jenna, who is your biggest surprise that didn't end up in the World Series that at the beginning of the year and on paper you would have expected to be there? Interesting. That's interesting. I would have
expected to be there. I mean, I think Washington is an obvious one just because, and there's all kinds of opinions that I think a lot of people have in terms of the seeding. And like, I do agree that there's no way they should have been facing a team like Oklahoma in super regionals, nor should Oklahoma as the number 1 seed been facing a team like Washington. Like from the other perspective, like they have to play that. They're number 1 and that's who they have to play.
Trust me, Patty Gasso made that very clear.
Oh yeah, she definitely
And they drew Wichita. They had Wichita bust to them, which was a tough one too. You're right. Washington as a 16 was crazy. I was shocked how well though Heather Tarr took it because I asked her in the media availability right after that about the RPI, because clearly if you looked at the RPI, the reason they put him at 16 was because Washington's RPI was 16. Right. I was shocked that she was a proponent of the RPI and that she understood it. That surprised me a little bit, and I'll give her credit for admitting that because it kind of backfired on her in this case.
That was interesting to me as well, because I had her on the podcast right after the walkout and all of that stuff, and her thing when I asked her, like, what can the Pac-12 do a better job of? Because there was a lot of chatter amongst the Pac-12 coaches as to how we can better self-promote. The way, I mean, because the SEC is fantastic at self-promotion. How can the Pac-12 be better moving forward? And with that being said, a big portion of her answer had to do with like doing a better job of managing RPI, which I found interesting because I think some people would take a step back and think, is RPI the best measurement? And especially this past season, which she said they were told that it wasn't going to be as big of a factor. But then clearly it was. Like clearly everything was sort of aligned with RPI. And I think for this season, it just didn't make sense. You can't have that big of a discrepancy. I understand that the coaches poll doesn't ultimately mean anything when it comes to seeding and all of those things. But to have this big of a discrepancy between what the coaches poll rankings were and then what the seedings were, something's off. Like we need to have better alignment.
Oh, I agree. I'm in the group that's anti-RPI. And I hope to get Heather back on the podcast because I do want to get into that because I was taken aback that she defended it because this is the argument the question I've asked. Men's and women's basketball got rid of the RPI. They have implemented their own system, the net rankings, where it's a different structure. I'm not going to get into specifics of what it is, but basically they have, quadrants and 1, 2, 3, 4, how based on where you play the teams and stuff like that. But they got rid of the RPI because they felt that the RPI was not good enough of a formula to use to pick their field for the tournament. And my question I have is, if it's not good enough for basketball, why should it be good enough for softball? That's my concern.
Right. Yeah, and a good portion of it, and she pointed this out too, is especially this season, is geographical because it's like who of the top teams is near you. It's your winning percentage, but then it's your opponent's winning percentage and their opponent's winning percent. Like it's so like in the weeds. And so it's based on like who can you play this year? A lot of people, especially in California, for example, a lot of these programs couldn't leave the state, during preseason. So how are they supposed to go play, Alabama, et cetera? So I just think it's an imperfect system. I've always kind of, even as a player, I was like, what? I'm just trying to win games with my team. I don't understand this whole system. But I just think that this season in particular, really, like all of the imperfections were really, there was a light shown on them because of the geographical limitations, and it just wasn't apples to apples.
Well, and I think what we learned, the Pac-12 missed having Mary Nutter.
Yes.
Missed. missed Judy Garman tournaments, right?
Yes.
We forget about this, but all those traditional tournaments, ESPN's Clearwater tournament, which the Pac-12 also participates in, those were not played. Those tournaments, I think we found out, is so critical for the Pac-12 because of the reason. That's where you get your marquee non-conference games if you're the Pac-12. You can't just bust. Like in the South, it's easier. You can bust to places and play marquee non-conference games. Like here in Florida plays UCF, who's a 2-hour bus ride. Florida State, USF, etc. That's not the case on the West Coast for the most part. And I think the Pac-12 thought, hey, let's just play each other more times. That will help the RPI. No, it doesn't. That actually hurts them more. That does not help the formula because you already played that team. And I would argue, Jenna, it hurt the Pac-12 because a team like Oregon State, for example, if they didn't play so many games against the Pac-12 in conference and, quote, out of conference, I think they would have been to the tournament because they had good wins, but they were under 500 because they beat each other up. And I think it cost them at least a spot in the tournament. And I think that's what hurt the Pac-12. It was interesting you mentioned that because I had Matt Larson on, who was the committee chairperson on our podcast, and there was a lot of rumors and innuendo, and I asked him about the RPI, and he said, look, we understand what basketball is doing. That's one of our most important tools. When he said that was like my ears like, uh-oh. and he told me, this was in April, we're going to try to keep this as normal as possible as it would be every year. And I think that's why they depended on the RPI, because that committee, whether you like it or not, depends a lot on that formula. I don't agree with it. I personally think they need to use eyeballs, and I think you could do that. But they depend on that, and it's not as easy. They're not just going to fly everywhere and watch every game. It's almost impossible. So I do think what they decided is this RPI is still important. I think we need a better system for it. But I do agree with you. I think the Pac-12 learned a valuable lesson. I don't think they'll take Mary Nutter and Judy Garman tournaments for granted anymore.
Well, and I would throw in the Kajikawa tournament, too, that usually kicks off the season at ASU. And when I played pretty much every year, we went to all of the tournaments that we just mentioned, except for St. Pete Clearwater, since that didn't exist yet. But it was huge. And that's when you saw a lot of like postseason, sort of preseason, postseason matchups, if that makes sense, because that's where it was at. I mean, the competition was fierce. And I think the thing about the RPI is to just rely on it, for that to be the main sole thing that you're looking at, feels a bit lazy in the sense of, like, to your point, using the eyeballs. It's like, well, but even I'll go further with that. It's like, yes, let's use our eyeballs. Let's watch the games, but let's also not just watch the games that are most easily put on a platter for us to watch on ESPN. Pac-12 Network, for example, obviously doesn't have that sort of deal in place the way that the SEC Network does, the ACC Network, all of those things with ESPN. Big Ten Network's obviously different. All of these things, like, we need to use eyeballs, but we have to, like, it is the committee's job to be completely informed as to
I agree.
what has gone down.
I've been screaming about that for years.
Yeah.
Trust me. Because I do my bracketology stuff, and I watch a lot of softball. Like, I watch the beauty of ESPN Plus and Pac-12, Big Ten Network. I watch everything, and then I kind of make my evaluations. Like, I picked Northern Iowa to make the field because I watched them a lot on the field. But I will defend the committee on this because I have, in fairness, I've reached out to them because I'm like, you know what? I'm constantly hammering them. Let me find out. No, we do, and I'm not saying that I'm wrong. But I want to hear the other side of it.
Yeah. And
the two things that I've gotten back in their credit, they've been open. They've been much more open now. I got to give Matt Larson credit. He's been much more open than previous committee chair people. In the past, I always made the fun that they just, they don't even appear. They just kind of hide and send out a statement. But they've made a couple of things that they have that kind of handcuffs them a little bit. The 400-mile rule that they have to use that. They use that too, so they can, keep the flights down a certain amount. That messes up your seating situation because, a lot of people were upset that Oregon got sent to Texas. I projected Oregon and Texas to get paired up because I knew that Oregon wasn't going to go to an SEC site because a lot of those sites they're going to put teams that they can bust there. I cover UCF. It's a lock. They go every year to Florida or Florida State. That's part of it, and that's why the seedings sometimes get a little out of whack because they're throwing in the 400-mile rules. Now, I don't agree. I think they still make mistakes. Like Wichita State should not have bust to Oklahoma. They could have bust to Arkansas or other places. So they're not even good at that. but that is part of the equation that they use when they make these selections on the buses as far as seedings is concerned. And that's why the seeding sometimes is a little whack. So I will defend them. And I think if we got rid of the 400-mile rule, now we can really evaluate the committee and the selections a lot more fairly and criticize them much more fairly. I mean, we're still going to criticize them, don't get me wrong. But they do. I will defend them in that some of the things is not as easy as we think.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's something where it's like we have to also set them up for success. If that rule, and the rule feels weird because I know a lot of chatter was around, for example, like in regionals, I think there were a couple examples like Louisiana where there were a lot of teams from Louisiana at that regional. Okay, makes sense because of the proximity, et cetera. But then you have like Michigan, a Big Ten champion, going all the way to UCLA. I mean, I don't know what the mileage is there, but it looks off to have those things like that. So it's just something where like I don't know all the answers. Like I have some ideas on what we should at least look at to try to see like what is the answer, but it cannot continue the way it is. I think everyone agrees with that.
I agree. And like Georgia hosted because they benefited from Duke being good.
Right. And that's another SEC team that gets to host when they weren't seeded, right? Although, I mean, hey, a lot of respect for Georgia and coach as well and her retirement and everything like that. But that's besides the point. The point is that yes, the ACC, Clemson goes to Alabama. I mean, I think everyone was pretty shocked by that. But then you have Duke, who gets the recognition, but kind of not really, like sort of with their arm behind their back because they're in the SEC. I mean, home field advantage is a thing anywhere, but especially in the SEC, and they had it, and so it's tough.
Right,
I just think,
The reason Georgia hosted was because Duke can bust there. That's really what it came down to. Where really, in fairness, what they could have done, because obviously the Duke thing was so weird because they didn't pick them as a predetermined site. Like in a normal year, I think they would have been right.
We knew.
So what they could have done is have Michigan host Duke, because Michigan, and that could have been a nice olive branch. Like, hey, they're the ones, the Big Ten. You didn't play a non-conference, so you'll host, but you're going to be a 2. But instead, they went the bus route. They went the 400-mile route. So they rewarded Georgia to host, and Duke had to bust there alongside the other 2 teams that went in that regional.
Right.
And softball, it's a huge home field advantage. It is.
Oh, it is. And to your point, you said that they were really trying to make it as normal as possible. First of all, I that alone, that mindset, that approach, I just don't think works this season. So just that from the get, if that was the approach, I don't think that that's going to yield results that everybody feels good about, meaning all the coaches as well. But, if that's the case, then why did they pick predetermined sites? I know it was because of COVID, but I'm saying if we're making it as normal as possible, but then you choose a certain thing that's not as normal as possible, like we have to be consistent. We can't have it both ways. If it's going to be as normal as possible, do it full throttle.
I feel like the door. Well, this was a weird year for everybody. In fairness,
of course.
I think it was so weird. Like from February to March, things were changing. Like if you would have told me in February we would have 12,000 people at a softball game, I said no way. Nobody would have. So I think this was a tough year. I'm going to give them a pass from that standpoint, but I agree with you. I think that hopefully we use this year as a way to kind of tweak some things that need to be tweaked that really has been a long time coming. And people love our conversations. Clearly, I'm going to have to bring you back. We could go hours on this topic, off-season stuff. But let's go back to on the field here.
Yep.
What are you going to remember about this Women's College World Series?
I mean, first 2 words that pop into my head is Odyssey Alexander. But it's not just like what she did, throwing over 1,000 pitches, like leading the unseeded JMU as far as they went to the semifinals, all of those things, beating the number 1 overall seed. It's the results, but it's also like what she represents to me. She represents, she's her and her team, like not just Odyssey. It's also the entire team was there with her doing all these things. Lindsay Meeks is like everyone's favorite player right now too, in addition to Odyssey. But they represent that mid-major group. And, it doesn't only have to be Power 5 all the time. Like you're able to do it as long as you believe you can do it. And for Odyssey, in some of the conversations I've had on my podcast, for example, when speaking with Natasha Watley, Tori Tyson, who's Howard's head coach, Kelsey Stewart, who's on Team USA, and then Raven Siobhan, who's a Tennessee alum and Team USA alum, one of the things that they talked about a lot is that as young Black players, a lot of them were like, oh, hey, the coaches would approach them like, hey, do you have speed? Okay, let's stick you in the outfield. And they were and while like they were great at those positions, but then you have Natasha Watley at shortstop. And why that's a big deal is because you get to see them in that anchor position. And to see someone like that, like Angelica Selden is another one who pops into mind in the circle doing that. You don't see that often enough. And Odyssey was such a great example of that for young women everywhere and young women of color to be like, you know what? Hey, you can be the leader. You know, Danielle Laurie says all the time that there's a circle drawn around pitchers for a reason, and it can be anybody who's in that circle.
Great. Well said. I think as long as the Women's College World Series will be played, Odyssey Alexander will be brought up. That play against Oklahoma State will be brought up forever. James Madison will be brought up forever. I think one of the storylines now every year when you do a season preview on the podcast and we do a season preview, one of the questions we're going to ask is, who could be this year's James Madison, right? Who could be that team and I think that opens the door. We've had Christy Fox from UNLV on. We've had Kieran Kumar from Miami of Ohio. To me, and I hope, and some of the coaches made mention of this, I hope this is a message, too, to some of the players that, you know what, you don't have to jump, especially now with the transfer portal. You don't have to leave a quote-unquote mid-major to go to a Power 5 to have a legendary career. Odyssey Alexander now is a legend at JMU. She didn't have to go somewhere else where they already have the tradition. She's made it herself, and I think that's a great lesson as well for student athletes here moving forward.
1,000%, because a lot of student athletes are stuck on, oh, I want to go to a Power 5 or I want to go into this particular conference or this particular school because of the just notoriety and recognition that those institutions get. But it really should be a decision based on what is best for you. What is the best fit? And I believe in sort of that warm, fuzzy feeling. I mean, I had it when I went on Stanford's campus. Pretty much everybody I've talked to on my podcast says the same thing about why they chose where they went for college softball. There was a lot less transferring back then than there is now. It's like you just kind of get that feeling that, okay, this is home. It feels right. And I don't think anything should be forced. I don't think it should be just because it's Stanford or just because it's Oklahoma. Like, go where you're going to be able to grow the most as a player and a person. Odyssey is a great example of that.
Yeah, and I think it's a message for the parents too.
Yes.
Because let's be real. A lot of times it's the parent that's telling the kid, hey, it'd be great to go, especially if the parents are travel ball coaches and they think they're the best. They know all more than the coach does. Oh, my kid's not playing as much. Maybe I need to seek, greener pastures. And it's not necessarily the case all the time. And I think Odyssey Alexander is a great example. Gordon and company, what JMU has built under Lauren Laporte, and prior to that with Mickey Dean, going back to Megan Good, going back to Jalen Ford. I mean, this is a program on the rise, and credit to JMU Athletics. They invested in softball. Again, it goes full circle. If you invest, they will come, and they will happen. And I think it's a great story. I agree. I think JMU's a great story from the Women's College World Series. 2 teams playing from the losers bracket to get to the championship is wild to me. This Oklahoma record-setting offense also is going to be very memorable. Maybe the greatest offense we've ever seen in the sport, right?
It might be, and I'm really not the one to kind of jump straight to the sort of absolutes, like, oh, this is the greatest team of all time or greatest offense of all time. And I heard some of that chatter early on in the season. And I was like, okay, guys, let's pump the brakes, let's see how things play out. But honestly, like it was not a normal offense. Like this team this season, this is not normal. Then Jocelyn Allo leading the way, but really just all throughout the lineup, let alone the pinch hitters that they have ready to go as well, that they can pull off the bench at any time. I mean, it was incredible. Like, it really has been. I mean, the amount of home runs, but just their batting averages as well. That's the thing, is I think the long ball, we always get really easily caught up into it because it's exciting, it's fun, and there was so much of it. Like, then now they have the team record for a single season. But the averages impressed me too, because I think if you can hit for power and hit for average, that's where greatness happens.
Yeah, they set every record, and it's a memorable team as they win the national title. Jenna Becerra joining us here on In the Circle. We have thank you so much. We've taken a lot of your time, as you've now learned from me and getting to know me. I like to talk a lot, and I like talking softball a lot. So I apologize for keeping you for an hour. Since I promised you I would get you out earlier than that. But, I think you understand where that comes from as a fellow podcast host, how that works. Tell the audience one more time where they can find you and all your great work and your podcast as well, which I've subscribed to, and I'm looking forward to listening as well when I get a chance to. Now that we have an off season, especially, I'll be listening to some previous episodes.
I know. It's funny. We went from like 0 to 100, it felt like, just from last season to this season. The least amount of World Series game played, meaning 0, to the most possible in 17 this year. And it's just been a wild season. But yes, so Believe in Softball is the podcast on Believe Podcast Network. It's spelled BLEAV. Get it anywhere on Apple, Spotify, YouTube as well, anywhere you get your podcast, but you can also watch it. And on social media as well, Twitter and Instagram at Believe in Softball. And you'll see all the content there.
Jenna, great stuff today on our shows. I appreciate it very much. We'll definitely get you on more often as well on the podcast. We're throughout the season, off seasons, and during the season as softball news happens, as people are saying, they look at that. People are jumping in right now, so they're excited. Thank you so much. Enjoy it. Appreciate it, and we'll talk soon.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Eric. Take care.
Take care. Jenna Becerra joining us here. What a great guest we've had on here to help us break down this Game 3 of the Women's College World Series, and also talk a lot of great subjects in softball in the offseason that's coming up here as well. And, we'll see we'll see what happens in this offseason. I think there's a lot of interesting topics to come up here in this offseason. And Jenna was fantastic. She was great. We had her for an hour to talk some podcasts there. We're going to have some more guests. We're not done yet. We're lining up another guest. We're hoping Justin can hop in from OKC for his reaction. I think Victor has landed to the airport. So we'll see which one of them decides to hop in here. And also of all of you, which questions you have, keep sending some questions there. As far as what do you think for softball? I think there's some great topics, questions there about what to be addressed. And I think for the sport now, the next step is, instant replay, the scheduling format. I'll be curious about the Women's College World Series. How far does that go? Justin, when we had him on earlier this week, doesn't think that will take place till 2023. We'll see. But yeah, we'll see about that. And then I think the obstruction rule, does anything happen to that as well? Jesse James asking the question, who are the early favorites for next season? I think you have to put Oklahoma still at the top because they're Oklahoma, right? How many times do they have to prove to you? They're just going to they reload. They don't retool. And I think I would put them at the top. I think from a Pac-12 standpoint, I'm going to be very interested to see what happens with Washington being kind of the situation there with being so young, obviously with Gabby Plain graduating. Arizona is very young. And obviously Caitlin Lowe's the new head coach. And I think that's going to be interesting. Alabama will be a favorite. Fouts returns, we would think, as well as obviously Kilfoy. So they'll have their 1-2 punch at Alabama back. LSU is very young. I think they could be a team in the mix as well. UCLA, how can we forget UCLA? I know they lose Rachel Garcia. I know they lose Bubba Nichols, but they still have a tremendous talent coming back there. Rob asking, do you think they should reseed teams 1 through 16 between regional? No, I don't. I like the bracket. I think if you want to tweak the World Series seeding, that could be talked about. But no, I like it the way it is. I don't think they're going to reseed it anytime soon. So we'll see what happens with that. All right, look who's joining us from Oklahoma City. Fresh off watching Oklahoma win the national title in the win. I can hear that win. Justin McLeod joining us. Where are you?
Standing in the stairwell here at Hall of Fame Stadium. I'm soaking up every second I get.
Trying to get away from the heat, aren't you?
That's exactly right. And let me tell you, the wind feels really nice.
I know that win. I have taken that win. Look, let me just say this. I'm glad they're renovating this. They renovated the stadium. But I'm going to tell you, Justin, I'm going to miss that little spot outside in that press box where I sat in 2018. I am going to miss that spot.
Well, you had to pardon me there. I had a nice fist bump with the incomparable Chris Plank as you spoke.
And you didn't Christopher Plank. Yeah, I'm surprised he still has a voice. Does he have a voice?
I don't know. I didn't speak a fist bump, so
maybe that's all you can do right now.
Well, might not. But
Victor has joined. Victor has also joined us. He has landed. He has landed.
He landed
just
landed.
In
time to see that the game is over.
That's right. Fire alarm in the house.
Well, thankfully I was able to watch the game on the plane.
Very good. So, by the way, fire alarm. I don't think you're going to live this. Fire alarm is in the house, Sky Chicken 9.
No.
So we'll see of that. All right, Justin, let me start with you. You were there in person. Your thoughts on this game now that you have time to digest. Tremendous ceremony. It was great to see a national title be awarded, by the way. I started the show a little later because we haven't seen one in 2 years. So I thought that was cool. But what stands out from this Oklahoma 5-1 victory in your mind?
Well, I think once Oklahoma got to a point of resilience yesterday, I don't think there was any stopping them. And, we saw Juarez and how she showed up, she showed out all week. I mean, she was 5-0 in the week, averaged more than a strikeout an inning. This is the best week she's had all year, performance-wise, best 5-game, 6-game stretch. But I think once Oklahoma got to a point, once they came alive, they weren't dying again. I know that kind of sounds odd to say, but honestly, that's kind of how it should be. I think once Oklahoma got to that point, that was it. That's how I was going to stay.
Victor, what was it like watching softball from literally the air?
Well, it's unusual. I would say that. Very unusual, but the feed kept cutting in and out. But thankfully, I was able to figure things out and get everything ready for the game. And I think the question I want to get to, so let's jump into it right now. The decision by Coach Alameda to bring in Wilson in that third inning, that really turned the tenor of the game over to Oklahoma, because they pick up those 3 runs, they go up 5-1, and Juarez is able to cruise comfortably since. Are you guys surprised at that move by Coach Alameda? And Justin, I'll start with you with that one.
Oh, Justin, I think we don't hear you right now. I think you're muted.
Yep.
Now we hear you. There you go.
It surprised me the way Alameda handled the pitching tonight or today. It's not yet. It did surprise me. I expected her to go with Watson because of how good Danielle Watson was in game 1, but I expected it to be Watson if Oklahoma has solved her. Quick hook to Sandercock, quick hook to Arnold, maybe a little longer kind of thing. But I kind of expected a by committee approach. I didn't expect it to go the way it did. I didn't expect Watson to be in there as long as she was. I did not expect to see Emma Wilson today. I thought Sandercock should have come in earlier. Hindsight's 20/20. But the pitching staff and the management thereof did kind of surprise me in this one. I expected the start to be Watson, but I didn't expect Alameda to run the pitching staff today the way she did. And so that aspect of it surprised me.
I don't think I've ever been more shocked in a championship series than when Emma Wilson came in. Emma Wilson this year coming in had appeared in 18 games, 2 starts, had pitched 20 innings the whole year. Now, she did pitch in game 2 at the end, but I thought that was more of, hey, we're down, let's not use, Watson and all that. I never thought they would bring her in a situation like they did. And I was shocked that she went to her before going to Sandercock. I still don't. And obviously, I'm going to watch Patty. I'm going to watch Lonnie's press conference afterwards when I upload it. I just don't understand it. And I wonder, Justin, is this a case here? And I wondered. I did say I thought they would go by committee. But is this a situation where sometimes you overthink it as a coach? You look at what Patty Gasso did. You know what? She went with her best pitcher, who it didn't matter that she started yesterday. She went with her best pitcher. She rode her, and she got the win. Whereas I think Florida State tried to be cute there, trying to maybe say, hey, Oklahoma hasn't seen much of Wilson. Maybe we can get away and get some outs here. When in reality, you should have just gone to your horse in Sandercock, who's your best pitcher. And by the way, when she came in, she did a good job. She did a good job. So I was stunned. I was very stunned.
Yeah, it was. I thought Sandercock should have been number 2 for a variety of reasons,
yes.
But the fact that she came in and did what she did just kind of underscored those reasons for me. Looking at her, I kind of felt like, she is their horse. It's not like they have they don't have a number one to the extent of a Megan King or of a Jessica Burrows, but Sandra Clark has been their number one all year. And so I think, it did surprise me. I think maybe there is a little overthinking there because of the Wilson in. At the same time, it could have just been that Florida State just thought, well, Wilson didn't pitch terribly yesterday. Didn't get shelled for 10 runs kind of idea. Maybe go ahead and change it up and not bring in Sandra Clark right away. But even then, I think Wilson in that spot just doesn't work. I was surprised Sandra Clark was number 3, but she did what I expected her to. It was just too little too late.
Yeah, I mean, if this was game 1, okay, I could see that. That's when there's less pressure. You try some things, right? Like, I think that's one of the big reasons why I think Coach Gasso started Nicole May. You're going to throw your youngster. You're not going to wait till game 3 to bring her in. You're going to use her in game 1. That's the part. But to have your in the national championship game, basically, to decide to bring in a kid, Wilson, who I'll have to look back. I don't know the last time she pitched prior to game 2. We got to go way back, probably. I'm just shocked. And I get the argument as we lose Justin. It's Victor. It's going to be like that, folks.
Yes.
I think she thought too much of it. I really think what happened here is this is somebody that Oklahoma hasn't seen a lot. Okay, because they saw a lot of Arnold. I think there's maybe, we can get some outs here through the order because they haven't seen her a lot. The problem is what happened, Victor. She got wild. She threw a wild pitch that scored the 3rd run because she's young. You're young. And that's a veteran like Sandra. To me, I'm sorry. You go with your best. If you lose with your best, you can live with that, in my opinion. And Sandra Cox, their best.
Well, and I think Nicholas brings up a point here that she probably liked the fact that Wilson threw the ball down in the zone. So,
clearly,
and I can certainly understand that.
That was clearly part of it. Yes, I agree.
So, and here's the other thing. If Wilson pitches well, then you bring in Sandra Cox, and then Florida State comes back and wins the national championship. We're praising Lonnie Alameda for that move she makes today.
That's a big ask. This is the most historic offense in the history of the sport. They have shattered every record now. They have done it. And you're asking a kid that has thrown 20 innings all year to get the National Player of the Year? Now, she did. She got a ground out. But then you're facing some All-Americans after that. I think that was a big ask. I think it's a big ask there, Victor. Now, again, if this is game 1, I get it. But this is game 3. There are no more days. The season's done. It's over. Go with your best. Look at what Oklahoma did. There was no moment in that game where you thought they were going to pull G. Juarez, right?
Nope.
And I'll tell you this. There was no scenario unless it was a unique circuit. I don't think Nicole May was going to see the ball, not because she's not a bad pitcher. I think Patty Gasso was like, if I'm going to lose, I'm going to lose with my bat.
Yes.
And G. Juarez was her best.
I 100% agree with you. Yeah, absolutely. No question. And I felt, and here's the biggest thing. They put up a graphic of Juarez in the 1st inning and then Juarez after the 1st inning. The biggest thing for G was that she gave up a 0 on the board in the 1st inning, and then Oklahoma scored first. That was the worst case scenario for Florida State, because now you're starting to press. They did get that RBI double from Cheryl to get themselves back in it. But Oklahoma, they're like Golden State, because Golden State thrives when they're ahead and they can put the pressure on you as a team. They put you out of your comfort zone. Oklahoma's the same way. They put a 2 spot, they put a 3 spot. They put pressure on teams to play outside of what they normally like to play. Florida State is the team that puts the ball on the ground, puts the ball in play. When you're down 3-1, 4-1, 5-1, you start to press. And with Juarez's ability to throw that rise ball, mixing in with that change, she got a lot of fly ball outs today because Florida State was pressing.
I think that's a great point. There's 2 great points there you just made there. Oklahoma makes you do things you don't want to do. And one of the reasons why G. Juarez is so successful, Florida State, this particular Florida State team, unlike past Florida State teams, is not a home run hitting team. Elizabeth Mason aside, I know they hit some homer. But you're right. With their success is putting the ball on the ground and base hits, using their speed. That was wiped out the last 2 games. After game 1, it was successful. So that's part of it. And I think you make an interesting point here. I don't think Lonnie uses Wilson in any other scenario, but because it's Oklahoma's offense, it makes you do things you don't want to do. Maybe you're overthinking, like, how do I stop? How do I control this offense? I'm going to bring in this kid that's thrown 20 innings that Oklahoma probably doesn't have a big book on, even though you threw her in game 2, and maybe I could surprise them, keep the ball down, get some outs, and eat some outs away. I don't think she does that against any other team. She hadn't used her the entire World Series before until now. Why? Because it's Oklahoma, and they get in your head with that offense, doesn't it? And I think that's a great point you just made. I think that went into Lonnie's thinking is, I can't stop this offense with 1 arm or 2 arms. I need every arm I can get. I just think she picked the wrong one. And it happens. But that's what happens, right? It's the psychology. Oklahoma puts pressure on you because you know that they could score runs and then in bunches. And I think that's a great point you just made. I think that's what happened here. You overthink things. Oh, they've seen Sandercock already. Oh, they've seen Kaylin Arnold already. Oh, they've seen – let me throw somebody they haven't seen that much. Sometimes, though, guess what? They cost themselves because she got wild – and she gives up the 3rd run, and then Coleman made him pay with that hit with 2 runs. And I think at that point, everybody knew the game was over.
Yes. When I saw Coleman get that 2-run single to make it 5-1, and I'm like, yeah, I think this game is over for all intents and purposes. And it turns out it was.
And I hope, as a longtime softball fan, and I get the fact that everybody has staffs and all this stuff, old school softball won today. Going to G. Juarez, that's old school, right? The new thing to do is go by committee, use arms, different arms. Old school softball still works. You can still ride your pitcher. And G. Juarez, they rode G. Juarez. It's game 2 and game 3. They didn't worry about, well, they saw her. They've seen, maybe we should try. Maybe we should start Shannon Sale and then bring it up. Don't get cute. Throw her. And Florida State had no answers for her. And you brought up the great point. The thing is, they just kept popping the ball. Heck, they were fortunate they scored the run on the ball that was lost in the sun by Jennings. But that was the brilliance of it. See, Nicole May is one that depends to keep the ball down. Well, that works right into Florida State's advantage because they want the ball down. Not the case with Juarez, who was electric. This was the best I've seen G. Juarez since she was at Arizona State. And a great way to her to finish. Do you agree with her being named the tournament most outstanding player?
Juarez's career, going back to Arizona State, the best stretch that we've seen G. Juarez pitch.
All right, hold on, Vic. We're losing you. I think
we lost both games of the Champ Series.
Right. Yeah, we're losing you a little bit. We were doing so well. It was so good. All right, I think we got you back. Try again.
Yeah, I was going to. Yes. So I was making a point about G. Juarez, Eric. This was the best we've seen of G. Juarez in her time in Oklahoma. She's pitched ever. And that's including her time when she was an All-American at Arizona State. Her command, and a lot of people weren't aware of this, and credit to Bev Mowens for highlighting it today. Juarez had a serious injury that impacted her in 2020.
Yes.
We kind of highlight. Yes. So she really had to reinvent her game. And also, let's give credit to Jen Rocha. She had a beautiful game plan in game 3. She understood that if Oklahoma gets out early, let's implement that rise ball. Let's get that change up. Let Florida State get some early outs and outs in the air. And that's exactly what happened.
I agree. And I agree with you, Kelly. G was better in this World Series than in 2019. I agree. I agree with you, Sky Chicken 9. Patty notoriously rides the hot hand, just like Eric said. Props, sir. Yeah, thank you. I know sometimes. I know a few things. So it was,
things, yes.
I thought it was a great credit to her. And I had a vote, by the way. I had a vote which was cool, by the way. So props to everybody. You probably would have had a vote too if it wasn't for the fact you were literally in the air.
I did submit my vote. I had to submit my vote yesterday before I left.
Well, series didn't end.
I know. All right.
Do you have any issues with G being the most outstanding? I don't. Now, I didn't vote for her, but I don't have a problem with her getting the award.
No. Particularly the way. Yeah. If you look, here's where she won it. She won it with her performance versus UCLA on Saturday, and she won it with getting them to the winning those 2 games to win the championship. Those 3 performances helped G Juarez become the most outstanding player in the Women's College World Series.
I don't have a problem with it. I didn't vote for her. I voted for Mackenzie Donahue. Can we give a shout out to Mackenzie? This has become a darling overnight.
Lou! By the way, ladies and gentlemen, they're not saying who. They're not saying who. They're saying Lou.
Did you see? I don't know. Were you able to see on the broadcast? They showed this. Somebody had a sign of her, like a Nike thing, or like a kind of a image thing with her. And she made some great catches.
Yes, they took
defensively there.
The photo of her from Game 2 and put the Air Donahue. Had Air Donahue like Air Jordan. So she's the next star in Oklahoma. She's going to be the next star in Oklahoma with Allo and Holman and the rest of that crew and Jennings. So that's the next one in line for Oklahoma.
I mean, I was worried about her. Remember the foul? There was a foul ball where she dove and nearly hit the wall, kind of like Mendez did in right field in the 7th inning. That kid, I was talking to our friend Sean, who's a diehard Sooner fan. He compares her to like a Baker Mayfield type. The kid that's just the fans, the Oklahoma fans love Baker Mayfield. And I think that Mackenzie's going to be in that category for them.
Fair. That's fair.
So I thought that was tremendous deal for them. And then Allo, boy, to me, the game-changing moment of this series was 6th inning.
Game 2.
Jennings reaches on the air, and then Allo, on a great pitch by Sandercock, takes her deep to right field, changed the whole complexion of this series. It was all Oklahoma from that point on, and then she set the tone again with the homer in the 1st inning.
Yep, those are the 2 biggest swings for Oklahoma this season. The Allo home run to give them the lead in Game 2, and then a home run in Game 3. Those 2 swings kind of let you know that it was Oklahoma season. And Oklahoma fans, they have the thing about the number 4. Oklahoma had to win 4 elimination games to get to the Champ Series. The final score of the game, they won by 4 runs. And this was Patty Gasso's 4th national championship in the last 8 seasons. Just saying.
Gasso's 5th overall, too, which, Kendrea has the record at 8. Could she get to 8 is going to be the interesting question here with the way this program is rolling right now. That's going to be one of the interesting storylines. How close can she get to that mark of 8 national titles? She's among top 2, top 3 all-time right now in national championships won.
Yes. Yes.
So pretty amazing. Pretty amazing run. And look, it's a heck of a run for Florida State, too. Let's speak about that. I mean, we focus a lot about the decision of the pitching move, but the fact they even got to a Game 3, the fact they were 6 outs away from winning the national title, which probably is going to sting in Tallahassee this off. But that's a heck of a run. I think this was Lonnie and Travis Wilson's best job they've done since they've been there. I don't think this was their best team. This was a young team. I think you saw that, Victor, up close with some of the freshmen that they have. A kid like, obviously, Mudge, who's really stepped up at the top of the order, and Harold at right field. I think they overachieved. Muffley. I think they overachieved in a lot of ways. A credit to those super seniors that have been part of that national title team to kind of lead the way in the postseason. But I think this was their best run. And I think they kind of ran out of fumes here at the end. But a heck of a run. Heck of a run. I don't think there should be no heads should be held down. They overachieved, in my opinion.
You won the first game against the number 1 team in the nation, and you were 6. You're gonna get Sandercock back. You're gonna get Watson back. You're gonna have a bulk of that team back for next season. I think Harding's gonna be a star at Florida State. Her and Mudge are going to be those next stars at Florida State for 2022 and beyond. And of course, Eric, the transfer portal. The transfer portal is going to be a big of a storyline in terms of what
Right.
it's going to be as big as recruiting. Because remember,
right.
Kaylen Arnold, who helped get them to the World Series, transferred in for. We spoke about Kaylen Arnold transferring from out of Tennessee 2 years ago when I was in Oklahoma. So the transfer portal is going to be as big of a story going into the offseason and going into 2022 as who will be recruited, the top high school recruits.
Yeah, it was funny. One of our viewers was asking, what's the biggest story of the offseason? Without question, it's this transfer portal. And we had Patty Gasso on again in the fall, who, by the way, as I mentioned this with Jenna earlier, she just speaks the truth. Like, remember, she told us in the fall this was the best offense she ever had in the fall. Hello? That turned out to be accurate.
And she was right about that.
She said last week on Wednesday, a media day, before the start of the Women's College World Series, that Juarez had the best week of practice ever as a Sooner. Well,
she was right about that.
And there was another thing she said in our interview. She said this was going to be the craziest offseason ever with transfers because of all these players that have an extra year of eligibility that wasn't planned. Remember, they didn't just give it to seniors. They gave it to everybody. So now you have juniors that are seniors an extra year, plus you have recruiting classes that are coming in. The numbers don't work. There's not enough room. So you're going to see more movement than ever before this offseason because of the numbers game. And Patty Gasso mentioned that. She was concerned about that from the standpoint for the sport. And I think you're going to see a ton of moves here in the next year or two as people try, because it's all messed up.
Yes.
I had no issues with the seniors getting the extra year when they made that decision. The thing that surprised me is that they gave everybody an extra year. And that, that everybody that follows softball knows that recruiting classes are years in, it's years in the making. So now all of a sudden,
2023, 2024.
Right.
And also, don't forget, Eric, the debt period is lifted 12:01 tonight.
Yes. There's a reason why we didn't. It's a reason why we didn't have coaches on our pregame and postgame today. They're chopping right now at the bits. They haven't been able to.
They're preparing themselves.
Yeah, rightfully so.
They're preparing themselves.
By the way, with rightfully so. In fact, I'll thank all the coaches who have been on. It's been more than incredible. We'll get to that at the end, but. I think the transfer portal is going to dominate. Not that coaching won't, but I don't think the coaching carousel will be as crazy as it's been the last couple of years. Now, obviously, you have an opening right now at Georgia. People are asking about that. I still believe it's going to be Tony Baldwin that gets promoted. But if he doesn't, that could start a domino because they're going to get a marquee name one way or the other. Either they're going to keep Tony or they might go outside. And if they go outside, they're going to get a good head coach, and that could start a domino. But the Mountain West obviously has some big questions there. They got 3 openings there. But I think the transfer portal is going to dominate because there's going to be a lot of big names. There was a big name today. Puck,
Jesse Puck. Jesse Puck is going to be playing at Arizona State 2022. That's a huge get for Trisha Ford.
Right. KB Sides apparently is in the portal from Alabama. So, I mean, big
KB
names.
Sides in the portal. I believe Sarah Jubis from James Madison. She's also in the portal as well. Troutwine into the portal as a grad transfer for North Texas.
Yep.
Aaron Edmondson,
Texas Tech. Yep.
Yeah, there is going to be so. And here's what I would like to see, and I hope this is the case. For a lot of these, I think James Madison may have an impact on it. Don't worry about going to a Power 5 school and trying to find your spot. Go to a mid-major and be like James Madison.
Yeah. We were talking about that prior to you coming on. That's the legacy, that you don't have to jump ship at the, because your mommy and dad, is a travel ball coach. So he wants you to move to, hey, it'd be great if you go to the Power 5, son or daughter.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I agree. No, I definitely agree 100% with that. By the way, I agree with you, Fang 9. Just donated to the softball stadium project. Let's get it built. Talking about the Oklahoma Stadium. Remember that?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Probably a good idea.
Trust me, they're gonna get some extra donations with that national championship that they've won today.
Name the stadium after Patty. Yeah, I think that goes without saying. Build their statue. Well, I mean, they build statues for like Jason White. If you're going to build one for Jason White, you might as well pick.
Hey, they need to build one for Patty Gasso. I agree.
More qualified than Jason White. Like, what are you guys doing?
Wow,
Jason White.
By the way, that's what Oklahoma does. If you win a Heisman Trophy, they build a statue after you. So they need to build statues, monuments, stadiums, everything.
Well, we don't have a Heisman in softball, but we do have national championships. Are you getting? Wow, you're getting a ride here. What are we doing?
No, I just arrived back in my apartment.
Oh, okay. All right, let's
arrive back in the apartment.
I don't know if we'll ever. Justin's got phone issues, so we may not hear back from him. But
it may be a while.
Let's see here. All right, so give me your final thoughts, Vic. What are you going to remember about this World Series? What are you going to remember about this season in general?
The biggest thing,
people are like, "Are you sure that Jubas is it?" Like, did you?
I think there was. I have to confirm the source, but I did see a name in the portal that may have played in Oklahoma City alongside KB side. So I'll have to confirm. I'll have to see.
See, this is why I don't like talking about the transfer portal. It's all like speculation, and where I don't have the access to it. So who knows? But as you were.
Yeah, the biggest thing I'll take away, Eric, the sport of softball has exploded after not having it in Oklahoma City in 2020. We're glad to have it back in 2021, and I feel this is proof that there's a clamoring for the sport more than ever before. There's a yearning for the sport more than ever before, but at the same time, the sport still has a lot of questions. Will we need to change the obstruction rule? Are we going to get instant replay? Welfare of student athletes. But one thing I will say, the Women's College World Series, it's exploded. And the fact of the matter is, it would not surprise me, Eric, next year if you see Women's College World Series games on ABC. Not saying that's going to be the Champ Series, but some games for the Women's College World Series, putting it on ABC.
Yeah, I think that's the next step. I don't know if you saw the numbers came out for Game 2. Over 2 million viewers. It hit that magic number. Over 2 million viewers. It is the fourth most watched college softball game ever. Game 2.
Wow. I'm not surprised. Surprised. I had a feeling it would get to that 2 million number. I was not surprised about it at all.
No. I've got it right here. I'm actually grabbing it right now. 2.081 million viewers. It's the fourth most. It's the most watched non-Game 3 ever. All right. So Game 1s, 2s, it's the most watched game ever. The audience peaked at 2.6 million viewers between 8:45 Eastern and 9 p.m. Eastern. So, and obviously, look, I get it. Obviously, if this game would have been in primetime tonight, I really do think it would have set the record. But that's a short-term thing. At the end, I'm actually more interested now, actually, to be honest. I'm curious what number it does do at 3 Eastern. Like, if it could get over 1 million, 1.5 million, that's pretty darn big for that time slot. So I'll be curious what it does. But still, this is a successful television run. It's the most watched Women's College World Series. And to your point, I think the next step is, yes, to move it to ABC to at least have some of the games on there.
Yes, I wouldn't be surprised if Elimination Saturday, if it was me, you have the afternoon games on ABC, and then you keep the evening games on ESPN, or some combination. But again, that's just me.
Well, I think you could see a scenario. I wonder, there's a couple ways of doing it. They might do it like kind of what the NHL did with the Stanley Cup Final, where you might have a game on cable and then games on network. You might see something like that, where maybe a Game 1 is on ABC, Game 2 is on ESPN, something to that extent. It's going to be fascinating.
That's possible.
It's going to be fascinating because remember, the ESPN will have the rights to the Stanley Cup Final and the NBA Finals next year, assuming we're back to a normal schedule. Keep in mind, the NBA this year, not a normal schedule because they're behind in the play. They started the season later. Same thing with hockey. So next year, in theory, there will be NBA playoffs and NBA Finals, Stanley Cup Finals, a long time with the Women's College World Series, which as a sports fan, that's what you like to say, whoa, woo, that's big.
Woo!
And so, but what's going to be interesting is how do you How do you digest all that stuff? Will be very interesting. Plus, does the schedule expand? Formats change in the postseason? Or I know Justin, when he was on with us earlier this week, he doesn't think the schedule format will change at the Oklahoma City until 2023. We'll see.
I agree. Always subject to change. That's the thing. It's always subject to change, Mr. Lopez, as you are fully aware.
Amen to that. I agree with that. So we'll see. It's going to be fascinating to see there. Obviously, JMU was a great story. I think that's a story where people will remember, among others, and really a great softball season in general. It was a fun season. We got it in. We got them in. There were some hiccups, but we got it in, and there was a lot of excitement. And I think we proved that this sport, this softball, is one of the top sports now in the country. Football's king. Nobody questions that. Men's basketball is big. But I think after that, especially in college athletics, there's a debate. And I think it's a real debate. And I think college softball is on the rise. I don't think the only thing that could slow it down is softball itself.
And it's proven that it could do that. It's proven it could do that a few times.
Agreed. And I think the things we got to do, we got to add instant replay. This is the only sport that does not have replay in the postseason. That's unacceptable. We got to get rid of obstruction.
Yes.
You made a great point. It's distracting now from great plays. We're not, I think that's going to be – the format needs to be tweaked at the World Series. I tend to agree with that. But, it's a healthy sport right now. And hopefully the transfer portal doesn't – moms and dads – stay out of the way. Let the kid be a kid and play, and stop trying to force them to go somewhere they don't want, because you think it's a good thing for them, but it may not be. So stay out of it.
It may be good for you, but it may not necessarily be good for them. Let them make the decision.
Right. And I don't care that and by the way, for you parent there, if you're a travel ball coach, just because you're a travel ball coach doesn't mean you know more than the coach itself in college.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. There's my preach moment. Let's take the moment to thank everybody that made this happen.
Yes.
Justin, who was on the show. Christy Fox, who was amazing.
Phenomenal.
Post-game analyst. Karen Kumar, Miami of Ohio, we had on. Ashley Waters, head coach Miami of Ohio, we had on. Elisa Goler, who joined us in the rain delay special, whatever you want to call it, on that Saturday.
Early weather edition.
Elisa Goler obviously joined us on the show as well. Jessica Schultz joined us for the pregame. We decided to do a pregame show. What were we as well?
Charlotte
Morgan joined us as well. I just think to me, and then today, our guest today,
Jenna Becerra.
Phenomenal. And that's the cool thing about our show is we give a lot of different voices to different places as well to make this happen, to this show, to have post-game shows after every Women's College World Series game. We had a pregame show with Chris Plank on last Wednesday? It seemed like
Wednesday.
We had Chris Plank on as well, who called just about every World Series game. I'm just going to say it, even though it's not true, but it feels like it because I heard his voice every day. But thanks to them, thanks to everybody who made the postgame. Thanks to you, Vic. You set a lot of that up from the site. Worked a lot of different hours. We had Madison Shipman on our podcast as well. We're gonna have Jenna's that's gonna be part of our podcast here for the wrap up. We got more shows. We don't take seasons off. Okay, so we still got plenty to go, especially with the Olympics. We're gonna do some sort of coverage similar to this for the Olympics. I don't know what yet because, when you're 13 hours difference, it's a little more challenging. So I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to predict that we're going to be on after the games. I'll put it that way. In fact, I don't think we will. Maybe the gold medal game. Maybe the gold medal game. Maybe. But we will have we will have content to cover that. Thanks to all the SIDs that have made the post-game press conferences available, media availabilities available throughout the season, and especially in the postseason. If you go to our YouTube page, you see all the post games there. Get a committee's rules person on. We've actually have. That's why you need to subscribe, Sky Chicken. You need to subscribe to our podcast. We've had people from the committees on.
Matt Larson on the podcast back in early April.
For the NCAA committee, and we've had coaches that have been part of the rules committee as well in the past, and we will continue to do that moving forward. So That's why you need to subscribe. But thanks to all the SIDs that made it happen, all the press conferences, to the fine folks at the Women's College World Series. I know the director of the Women's College World Series, she is retiring. Salute to her. Mm-hmm. Thanks to all the people that set you up and set us up for the press conferences as well, and all the notes. And I got to vote in the ballot. That was cool.
Yes, it was.
Thanks to all the and SIDs that set up the postseason stuff. Thanks to all the guests that we've had on during this run in Mayhem.
You're forgetting the most important. You're forgetting the most important people.
No, I was going to let you say it.
The viewers.
Yeah, seriously.
Because full disclosure, when me and Eric came up with this idea, like, are people gonna watch? Are people gonna follow along? If it's at like 11 o'clock Central, 12 p.m., 12 midnight, we were loud wrong. Your feedback, your interaction with us throughout this Women's College World Series, this unprecedented Women's College World Series, has been phenomenal. Our numbers have skyrocketed, and we are thankful and appreciative for all what you do. And Kelly's asking us to do more live shows.
We probably will. We probably will. Now, I'm not going to say we're going to do it I'm not going to get into it, but I do know that there are only a certain amount of hours that we're allowed to do use
per month.
But I think we
can do once per month.
Maybe. Yeah, I think that's fair. And again, I think we're going to do a lot of that during the Olympics as well, by the way. At what time, I have no idea yet. Give me some time to decompress. But we are going to have a lot of content during the Olympics. But yes, we will have live shows maybe once a week, every other week. There's topics to hit. We will post up interviews as well. That will continue from our podcast as well. And Vic, you'll be always brought to you'll always be known as Fire Alarm Vic when you come on. Is that going to be your new name when we do live shows now? Fire Alarm Vic?
It will be an inside joke to the new viewers, but those who've been following us since Oklahoma City.
It's my favorite moment of all the moments we've had on the postgame shows. That's like one of the top moments. That's like an inside, like if we were inside the NBA, you would have. I mean, you would never hear the end of it.
Okay, if I equate that, if this was the fire alarm going off is the equivalent of either Shaq tripping over the telestrator with the cord or Shaq getting run into the Christmas tree. One of those two.
Yes. Yes to all of it. Yes.
Thanks.
And I play the role of either Kenny Smith just laughing at you. Laughing.
No, you're Ernie Johnson.
All right, so that means Justin would be Kenny Smith in that role then, because he was laughing at you.
Justin would be Kenny Smith.
Fair. That's fair. Folks, we hope you've enjoyed it. Like I said, thank you to all. I mean, what you guys have tuned in, you've tuned in at 1 a.m. when we've been on. We tuned in at all these different hours. That's why you guys are great. Yes, we are on podcast and on YouTube as well. So subscribe to both. Anywhere you listen to your podcast, we do 2 episodes a week. There will be a podcast tomorrow. It'll be quite frankly, it'll be a lot of this show.
Yeah, pretty
probably,
much.
Right, Victor? I mean, Victor's going to decide. Honestly, in this episode, I have no idea what Victor's going to do. He's pretty much as full of blanche. But it'll be mostly a recap of this. We will have new shows next week. We're going to address the Mike Condrea. We're going to have a tribute show to Mike Condrea. We will address more of the Georgia deal as well with Lou Harris-Champer as well. And obviously there'll be some news that comes out. We'll be following that all season long, all year. So we'll be on twice a week. We will have shows on YouTube as well. We'll figure all that out as well. We'll have content posted on YouTube as well. So don't unsubscribe. We're still going to have content live or stuff like press conferences and interviews as well. So it's been awesome. Victor's been awesome, man. This was a success. This was a lot of fun, man. Thanks for your hard work. I know it's unique, different hours, working, editing stuff, putting guests together. You know, you're going to subscribe to this show and stuff like that. But I know you had a blast covering the World Series in person and even, throughout.
It was a fun trip to Oklahoma City. Unfortunately, wasn't able to see the national champion being crowned, but 16 out of 17 games is not bad. Oh, by the way, Eric, one final note I want to leave the fans with. 2015 was the first year where Division I, Division II, Division III had the best-of-3 championship series. This marks the first year that all 3 divisions had to go all 3 games.
True. And that's a salute to Division 2 and Division 3. We covered Division 3 in Salem. Thanks to the great folks in Salem. We had post-game pressers there as well.
Yes.
And then Division 2 in Denver. We cover all three divisions as well. We'll cover the Summer Olympics and all the other news as well. So pretty exciting postseason. You're right. All three. That's a pretty cool stat that all three, Division 1, 2, and 3, all ended up in 3-game series.
Yes. Very fun. And that's and then we'll definitely try and get the coaches all three national champions there as well. We'll get that in the off season. Of course, JUCO, junior college, had to crown their national champions. So we'll try and get those coaches on during the summer as well. And we're going to have some fun things coming on this summer. So stay tuned. Subscribe to our podcast. Download our podcast. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Turn on those notifications because we may announce that we may be going live again. And who knows what that will be, but it will be fun nonetheless.
It is tremendous. Wow. I didn't realize my social media Twitter is blowing up. Wow. Okay. I'll have to address some of those questions there.
Yes, you will.
And Seminole fans, it's going to be fine. You're good. I mean, granted, I would be a little bummed out too because you got to deal with another football season. It's not going to go well.
Thoughts and prayers to you.
I mean, Vic knows I like Florida State football for a long time, but I've accepted
it.
You
haven't had a reason to like Florida State football in a long time either.
Mackenzie Milton, though. We're rooting for Mackenzie.
Yes, we are.
But hey, great run. I want to ask you before we start. You mentioned, I forget, I don't even know what days anymore. One of these shows, you mentioned that you thought Lonnie could be one of the top 3 FSU coaches in any sport of all time if she would have won this national title. I want you to expand on that a little bit because I don't know. I don't know if losing this necessarily should change that. Where did you?
I don't think it will. I had her 3. Obviously, you have Bobby Bowden 1, and then you had 11 Mike Martin Sr. number 2. And then Lonnie ahead of Sue Summerall and Leonard Hamilton.
You can make the argument she should be ahead of Mike Martin. She's actually won a national title.
That's fair.
I thought you were going to say Jimbo. Jimbo won a national title there in football. Or the soccer coach, the women's soccer coach, Mark Kikorian, has won national titles in soccer. Let's throw him a bone.
Yeah.
But we'll let FSU podcast decide all that stuff.
We'll let Ward Chin and all of them figure that out.
Yes. All right, everybody. That'll do it. Enjoyed it. Stay with us. Follow us on Twitter, In the Circle SB. Make sure you follow us on the podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe on our YouTube here. Keep it here. We're going to still cover softball, all the off-season news and interviews, content. We'll have live shows, too, because obviously that's demanded now. So we'll make it happen, folks. Yes, Lonnie Alameda was an OU alum. Not a Gasso tree. She was prior to
Gasso. Not the Gasso tree. She was pre-Gasso.
Correct.
Gasso.
All right, for Victor's back in Florida. After we all started this in OKC, now he's back in Florida. For Justin, who hopefully his phone's okay, and Jenna, who joined us, who was fantastic. Make sure you follow her podcast and follow her as well and her great work. I'm Eric Lopez. We hope you've enjoyed this edition of In the Circle. Good night. Goodbye from Oklahoma City. The Oklahoma Sooners are your 2021 national champions. Good night.
Good night, Canada.